Hi, Adam here from lovecars.co.nz, and today we're talking about surging with foam cannons and water blasters. So if you're having surging with your machine, perhaps it's working normally, and then when you connect up a foam cannon, it'll start to surge and go whoop, 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 where the pump will come on and off, and you're not sure why that is. Well, what we're going to do in this video is we're going to run through some of the reasons why that could be happening, so you can hopefully rule them all out and get back to foam cannoning the way you want to be. Now, the most simple things we're going to rule out here. So the first thing to do is check, are any of your hoses bent over and kinked and twisted? It's pretty easy in the rush of things to overlook something. Sometimes with your water blaster itself, because it's spraying out through a very fine nozzle, it mightn't need as much flow. So you could have a kink or a bend that doesn't really cause an issue normally, and then when you connect up the foam cannon that's perhaps drawing more flow, that you may then have an issue. So just simple to check all those sort of things. Make sure that the hose in the bottom of your foam cannon hasn't sucked flat to the bottom of the bottle is another thing that can happen. Make sure you got water in there. All of those sort of basic kind of things it's worth checking. One thing people don't often think about though is an air bubble in the system. Now depending on your machine, they will all have different methods for setting it up and bleeding the system, but normally what we would recommend is when you connect up the hose to the machine to make sure you run water out of it before you connect it up to the back of the machine. And the reason for that is because if you have air inside your hose and you connect it up, then there's nowhere for that air to go when you turn the water on other than into your machine. So when you turn on the tap, you're going to force that air inside the water blaster, and that can cause an airlock. And one of the things that an airlock can do is it can create surging. So there will be a process in the manual for your machine. If you can't find the manual, you can probably download it online somewhere. Bleed it out, and then just run a bit of water out of the hose before you connect up. It's an easy habit to get into, and that can make, I'd say, about 30-40% of these issues go away. The other thing that can happen is you could get a blockage inside the foam cannon itself. So I've got here the top from a Big Mouth from Chemical Guys. It's a great foam cannon. Most foam cannons are quite serviceable. So this one takes a 16mm socket on here. So I'm just checking there, making sure that it's all clear. I can look down the end there and just make sure there's no contaminants or anything like that. It's got a very fine, so this has got a 1.1mm orifice, so it's quite a small hole. It wouldn't take too much to block it. And that can easily happen if you've had gunk or something on the end of your water blaster wand and you've chucked it in. Don't clean it with high pressure. Just if there is anything there and you want to rinse it out, just run it through with low water pressure. I normally do it over the sink. You can also, with a normal screwdriver, pop these little clip off. Just be very careful not to break anything when you do this, but they are quite, if you're gentle, quite easy to take apart. And most foam cannons will be similar to this. And then you can see here, this will come apart here, and a little meshy filter will fall out. So then you're just checking to make sure there's nothing blocked, no clogged, that you can see light all the way through. Again, here you can rinse that through with water to clear it out, and then just making sure that this isn't blocked here. Now this is where the magic happens. This little fine mesh ball of wire here is actually what creates most of the foam out of a foam cannon. It's also what the difference is, or the main difference between the high pressure pro water blaster foam cannons and the normal ones for lower and more normal water blaster pressure. If you've checked all of these things and there's no blockages, you're getting the water, you don't have an air leak, and you're confident that all that is fine, then the other thing that might be happening, unless you have a defective water foam cannon, which is pretty unlikely. I mean, there's not really, it's quite a simple mechanical system. There's not really things to go wrong too much apart from getting dirty or broken, which you would see. Is it could be that the water blaster itself is creating, has got a safety mechanism in it to protect itself from overpressurizing. So while we talk a lot when we're talking about the foam cannons, we'll talk about the pressures and the flow rates and what the foam cannons can handle and what we recommend to create foam. What they don't talk about is what the water blaster people are doing to minimize failures and warranty issues for their water blasters. And one of the things they might have is a safety feature where if the water is producing a lot of flow and pressure, and that is then building up, if that's not going through the foam cannon, particularly this little filter, fast enough, and it's building up in the system, then it will, as a safety mechanism, often shut that pump off. Then as that water goes out, it'll turn it back on to create the pressure. It'll turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, and that's one of the reasons you can get a surge of a whoop, 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 whoop. And that normally comes down to the flow rate of your water blaster being too high for the foam cannon itself and what the tolerances for that safety mechanism of the water blaster itself are. Now that could be that you've got a very, very high powered water blaster that is beyond the specs of the foam cannon itself. It could also be that the foam cannon can handle the pressure that's being put at it, but the water blaster itself as a safety mechanism isn't tolerating the pressures and the water buildup that it is creating to push through in that foam cannon. If that's the case, then you are better to have a higher powered, the higher pressure foam cannon, such as this one here, which has different meshes inside, which will not create as much back pressure and will allow the foaming and less surging to happen at higher water pressure. That would be what I would recommend. If you think your foam cannon is defective, then by all means contact where you bought it back from and take it back and go in to see them. But in our experience, most of the time it is either that something has come up and blocked in here, that there's an airlock in the system, or that the water blaster itself is shutting on and off. There is another possibility that it could be, and that is the water pressure from your house itself into the foam cannon. And that could be, if that's not sufficient enough, then the water blaster may be pumping more than the water it can actually get from the house, and that can also create surges and issues. In New Zealand at least, it's not a huge issue. Normally your water pressure's pretty good, even rural, but just make sure you've got your tap turned all the way on. So that, in my experience of many years now, explains virtually every issue we've had with surging and normally allows people to fix it themselves quite quickly and happily and get back to foaming their cars. But if you haven't had any luck, by all means let us know in the comments. Feel free to ask questions. We try to get back to them as quick as we can. Thanks for your support, and we hope that this helped. See ya.